Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Selig. Good afternoon. That's better. There we go. There we go. I wanted to tell you I have to stand behind this podium because otherwise you'll see me shaking, and I'll be self-conscious of you seeing me shaking, and I'll shake more. I wanted to thank Suraj for putting on this conference and for whoever decided to put me in this panel with these three amazing women, and make me look so much smarter as a result. So thank you for that. And Francis, thank you so much for that. You can touch my hair and laugh at it any time. Can we just do that instead of my talk, actually? So I come to you today from the field of depth psychology, which is a branch of psychology that takes seriously the presence within each of us of both a conscious mind and an unconscious mind. And the field's typically thought to have originated with Sigmund Freud, who posited the personal unconscious. Then it was furthered by C.G. Jung, who added the collective unconscious, which includes the unconscious of families, of groups, of cultures, races, religions, and of course the human race. I think the field of depth psychology would be of great interest to the field of systems thinking, which admittedly is not a field I know very much about. And so like the good and thorough researcher I am, I went to learn more about it on the greatest resource of our time, Wikipedia. Where's Gene? Is he here today? Gene, make sure this is a good definition of systems thinking, okay? It's the last definition of a system where depth psychology and systems thinking overlap the most. So depth psychologists believe that not only do we possess an unconscious, but we're also possessed by an unconscious, or our unconscious. That the unconscious is autonomous in nature. The best example for the autonomy of the unconscious comes from our nightly dream life. I don't know if you've ever tried to will yourself to dream something before you've gone to sleep, but it's rare we have any success in making that happen. Better to say our dreams have control over us than us having control over them. So this is going to be the audience participation part of the talk. Joey, you might not want to photograph me, but turn around and photograph them right now. So, thank you. That was a big hint. Raise your hands if you've ever had a bad dream and you've woken up in a bad mood and you just can't shake it. Yeah? Raise your hand if you've ever done this before. When waking up from a good dream, 80% of people attempt to go back to sleep in hopes that they'll continue that dream. Yeah? What percentage of time are you successful? 100. Yeah. Successful at lying. That's it. Not very successful, right? Same things happen with the nightmare. You know, we go to sleep, we have a nightmare, we try to wake ourselves up, shake ourselves from it so we don't go back into the nightmare, and sometimes we go back in. Raise your hand if you've had that one. Okay. How about this one? That moment after waking up from a dream about your ex and saying, of all the dreams to remember, why this one? Yes? I saw some hands. Can't remember the good ones, remember the bad ones? Okay. Or here's one. Hey, Deepa, I dreamed of you last night. Oh, so cute. What did you dream? I don't remember. You ever had a sexual dream about someone that wasn't appropriate and you couldn't stand to face them the next day and look them in the eye? Or your partner, your wife, husband or wife in the eye? Yes. Okay. All right, you got it. You're all honorary depth psychologists. So that's the autonomous nature of the psyche. And now I want to move to look at the second part of the definition, which is that systems seek to fulfill their purpose, which is also really congruent with depth psychology. Although this is where Jung broke from his predecessor, Freud. So for Freud, he believed that we're basically reactionary human beings. We're reacting against primarily the wounds and expectations of our parents. And Jung parted from Freud and said we're not driven by our past, but we're driven toward our futures, driven by our dreams to fulfill our unique purpose in life. This is the definition of individuation, as Jung saw it. It's the striving towards wholeness, the striving towards self-actualization, the striving towards fulfilling our dreams. And it's our dreams. It's really important that it's our dreams, not someone else's dreams. So the other quality of the unconscious that I like to talk about is its inherent creativity. And again, we can go into dreams to see evidence of this too. Have you ever had a dream and you woke up in the morning and you thought, I can't make that shit up? Raise your hands. Don't let me be alone up here. I can't make that shit up, and not only that, I don't think I'd want to. So to this definition of a system, depth psychology would add that a system is creative and autonomous and always partially unconscious in fulfilling its purpose. So I want to add one more nuance to the definition before we move on to talk about education, and that comes from the work of James Hillman. He's another depth psychologist, who would remind us something really important, that the psyche itself is a system. That within each one of us we have multiple parts, multiple voices that are always interacting with each other, not always smoothly interacting with each other. We betray this when we're asked something like, well, what do you think about that? And you say, well, on the one hand I think this, on the other hand I think that, but sometimes I wonder about this other thing, right? Hillman teaches us a really great depth psychological move, which has to do with identifying the parts in our psyche which are present in any given situation. So say if you find yourself really angry over something, Hillman would say, who in you is angry? Now that's not the obvious question. What's the obvious question? Why are you angry, right? But he doesn't like that question because he says we never really know all the reasons why we're angry because we're partially unconscious human beings. So the better question is, who in you is angry? And this move allows you to identify the parts of you that are not angry. And then to find other parts, and then to take that part actually, and maybe use it to your benefit to marshal up the forces to deal with your anger or deal with the situation at hand. So those of you who know Gestalt psychology know this is a very similar principle. So to the definition of a system, I want to add this, that a psyche of an individual is a system itself. Of course, it's complicated enough being an individual and the presence of other individuals. It's really hard work. We're all what I call partially unconscious systems interacting with partially unconscious systems within partially unconscious systems, which makes it really hard to get out of bed in the morning. As this boy says, do I get partial credit for simply having the courage to get out of bed and face the world again today? And here I want to pivot into the main question. It's the burning question that Miriam will be talking about later that organizes this talk, which is, what would an education for individuation look like in contrast to an education for information? We all know what an education for information looks like, so I'm not going to spend much time going over it here, but I do want to give a few attacks before I leave. We all know that the Bush-era policy of No Child Left Behind, with its emphasis on standardized testing, left many children behind and the rest relatively bored out of their mind. This comic says, no child left behind, certain exceptions apply. To be clear, I don't think all standardized testing is bad. For assessing information of knowledge, standardized testing does work. But for assessing critical thinking skills, I would argue it's not the right tool. Let me give you one quick anecdote and then I'll move off the point. When I was chair of a high school English program in the late 90s when standardized testing was really bubbling up, I had all of my faculty take a sample standardized test and we compared our results, and guess what happened? Yeah, we didn't fail completely. We could have graduated from the high school we were teaching at, but we didn't get all the questions right. We failed questions. We disagreed about questions. And when we looked up the answers in the back to figure out why they were right, sometimes we couldn't figure that out either. So I want to use that, just a small anecdote, because I think the implications are rather disturbing. And shortly thereafter, there's some things that happened in between, but we'll just pretend like right after that I quit my job. I left high school. I became a high school dropout, I call myself. The teacher no child left behind. Though I teach now at a prestigious private institute, I still miss teaching high school, but I can't go back because the test is still the king, and I can't wear or bear that mantle. Yes, Obama's administration made some changes to public education, but they're primarily surface changes, and the double negative of no child left behind is replaced now with the vertical metaphor of race to the top. I want to tell you a secret. Lean in a little bit. I don't want to race to the top. Racing as a metaphor is competitive. In racing, there are those who win, there are those who get to the top first, and there are those who lose, who remain at the bottom. In racing, there is ranking, and in racing, some children will be left behind, or rather left at the bottom, while others are up front, up at the top. You know, when I was looking up images of children racing, I found this one. And I had a similar visceral reaction that some of you are having to it, and I debated whether or not I wanted to use it, but I think it captures emotionally what I feel when I think about these policies and their effects on children. Don't worry, I'm not going to leave it up for long. So, what is an education for individuation instead? Let me return to the definition of individuation, which is our personal striving for wholeness, for fulfilling the purpose in our life. Individuation goes on well here that says the teacher, to ensure a fair selection, you all get the same test. You must all climb that tree. That's standardized testing, yes? Individuation, instead, we might say, is about becoming true to our animal nature. Individuation is the opposite of standardization. In fact, it's absolutely antithetical to it. Individuation as a goal does not leave some ahead and some behind. It does not leave some at the top and some at the bottom. Individuation is the movement in. It's the movement where we move in to find our most unique selves, our truest expression of our highest being, and the movement out, where we bring our uniqueness and our truest and highest expression out into the world. Individuation, as James Hillman defines it, is the bringing out of the acorn. He imagines we're all born as an acorn. It's the bringing out of the acorn what is within it and allowing it to grow into the unique oak tree that it is. So many of you will come from states, maybe even countries, that have a version of the gifted and talented education program, sometimes called GATE, sometimes called TAG, talented and gifted education. I can just flip through so many images from different cities and states that have these. Students test into these programs. They test into programs. A very small percentage of them are actually accepted. As a depth psychologist by nature and a humanist as well, I find this incredibly disturbing. I worry about those who test into the programs, about the message they're being given that they are the gifted and talented ones. And that places them in a hierarchical relationship with their peers. And I worry about those who don't pass the test. And even more, I worry about those who aren't even deemed worthy to take the test in the first place. The large percentage of children we deem not gifted and we call not talented. In 2011, the National Association for Gifted Children published a position paper where they defined what a gifted child is. And they are students who demonstrate outstanding aptitude or competence in one or more domains. Here, the job of the teacher is to discern which students are outstanding, and they are also meant to discern which students are not. In contrast, in an education for individuation, we would see all children as gifted and talented, each in their own ways. The job of the teacher would be instead to discern in which domains every single student was outstanding. In the language of systems thinking, the goal of the teacher would be to help students to discern their part in the whole, their purpose in the system, and their unique contribution, even if it's a small one like this. I can suck pudding up my nose and blow it out the corner of my eye, but they still won't put me in the gifted class at school. Somewhere that kid will be useful. More seriously, there's a Khalil Gibran quote from the prophet that I love, and I think it's a metaphor for a good teacher. And he writes, "And I hunted only your larger selves that walk the sky." So if I were president, that would be my educational policy. I would replace No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top with the hunt for your larger selves. And I would teach teachers to watch the sky and track those selves. Can I get a witness? Thank you. Okay. Unfortunately, I'm not the president, and I'm no longer a high school teacher, and I do my hunting at Pacifica Graduate Institute, which is along the coast of the Santa Barbara, in Santa Barbara, California. And it's a school where students study depth psychology, mythology, counseling, and clinical psychology and the humanities. It's a school dedicated to education for individuation, or what I sometimes call an education for vocation, which is helping students discern the unique callings in their life and giving them the theories and practices, and more importantly, the courage to bring those callings out in the world. So since time is super limited, there's only a couple of aspects, salient aspects of this kind of philosophy of education that I can point toward, and I want to focus on the ones that are particularly pertinent to systems thinking. First is that if we accept the belief that the individual psyche is a system with multiple parts that make up the whole, how does that affect how we educate students? So I believe it's important to teach our students about the multiple parts of their psyches and normalize the inherent conflict within and teach strategies for helping those parts to get along. In other words, if we want to educate the whole learner, we must teach the whole learner about his or her parts. Right, Cliff? You got it. Now, you might say, yes, of course, this makes sense inside of a psychology curriculum, but I'm suggesting that the psyche doesn't live only in psychology. We bring our psyches to the study of math, to history, to science. In fact, it's only through our psyches that we learn anything at all. The psyche is a priori. It is the lens through which we learn, or rather, the multiple lenses through which we learn. Thus, we might imagine that as educators, it's incumbent upon us to help our students see which lenses they are seeing through. Does that make sense? Okay. So imagine this scenario. An 8th grade girl is frustrated in her math class because she can't solve a problem. Her teacher calmly sits down next to her and she asks, "Who in you is frustrated?" Not why are you frustrated, because the answer to that is obvious. She can't solve the problem. But who in you is frustrated? The student who's been exposed to the theory of the multiple parts of the psyche is able to identify that it's the perfectionist in her who is frustrated. And then the teacher asks, well, who might you call out as an ally to help you with your frustration? And the girl thinks for a minute and she says, my inner child. And a teacher asks, why the child? And the girl replies, because she likes challenges and games. And then the teacher says, what if you saw this problem as a game? The lens shifts, the frustration dissipates, and the fun begins. So second, if we assert the belief that the psyche as a system is creative and autonomous and always partially unconscious, then we have to offer tools and practices for our students to both get in touch with those unconscious parts of their psyche and learn to work with their nature and not against them. In the example I just gave, one way to do this involves teaching students about the multiple archetypal personages that live within. And I take this from the book that Cliff also referenced, Carol Pearson's work on Awakening the Heroes Within, where she introduces 12 archetypes. And you can find these in her book. Each of these archetypes comes with its own goals, its own fears, and its gifts. And the idea behind the archetypes is that they're universal patterns in the psyche. And as such, though we may have a proclivity to certain archetypes, we can access the energy of any of them when the time calls for it. So I'm going to give you one other quick example. Imagine it's the morning of the standardized test, which we can't avoid. In the same way that a football coach will pump up his team in the locker room with the energy of the warrior before the big game, we might pump up our students with the energy of the warrior before the big test. Perhaps we'll suit up with our game shirts. We'll gather together in the hallway and do a chant together. Perhaps we'll come running into the room as a team, slide into our desks, put our heads down, pick up our pencils, and the whistle blows, we'll begin the test. By doing this, we see the test as a game, but that's not really the most important part here. What we do by doing this is that we contextualize the results of the test as only reflective of part of who we are, never the whole. And by doing this, we fire up the creative energy that's appropriate for the task on hand. Does that make sense? Yeah? That'd make it a lot more fun, too, yeah? I like the idea of designing the game shirts, actually. Okay, third, if we accept the fact that the psyche is a system that seeks to fulfill its purpose, then we as teachers and professors need to become those hunters that Javon talks about, hunting our students' larger selves that walk the sky. This means we set aside our egos and our need to be listened to as experts in the room, and we turn our attention to our student psyches, our student selves, and we listen to them intently as if they are the most important people in the room, because they are the most important people in the room. We become the teacher as hunter, or using another metaphor, we become teacher as mirror, where we seek to see our students clearly and to mirror back to them their own gifts and talents until they can see them and hold them and live into them themselves. But something even more important than that, and it comes from this saying, give someone a fish and you feed him for a day, teach someone to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. I want to apply that to education, and I'm going to ask you to forgive me for mixing my metaphors here. But we might say if we teach our students to hunt for their own vocation, for their own soul's purpose and meaning, that they too will then begin to learn to hunt for the vocation of others. They might also begin to see others as having purpose and meaning as well. To that end, I teach a course in my program called Our Soul's Code, Depth Psychological Views of Vocation. I'm always thrilled when our students are able to discern bits of their own vocation through the course, but I'm actually more thrilled when they begin to hunt the vocation of others as a result of taking the course, particularly when they began to track the sky for their vocation of their children. So fourth, last one, we know that systems can be nested inside of other systems. I wish I had more time to go into detail on this one, but I'm just going to have to say enough to be suggestive. I'm so dying to look at what she's doing over there at the same time she's doing it. Hi, Heather. At Pacifica, we educate our students in the cohort model. This means that students enter into a cohort and they take all of the same classes at all the same time with all of the same people for the duration of the program, and we consider the cohort to be a sacred temenos. While our students sacrifice individual choice and curriculum by doing this, they gain from being an individual psyche made up of parts who is also a part of a cohort system or a cohort psyche. Thus, their individuation is always independent and dependent upon the group. In the best case scenario, each student's individuation is interdependent on the group. And by that I mean in the Buddhist term of independent co-arising. The individuals within the group rise and become their larger selves in the sky, not a singular star alone, but part of a group constellation. In the worst case scenario, each student's individuation is codependent upon the group, and the individuals sink together into mutual projections and transferences and scapegoating, while some students stand behind at the shore and others sink to the bottom. So how do we avoid this worst case scenario? We as an institution, we as a program, and myself as a chair of the program, acknowledge the truth in systems thinking, that we're always nested inside of multiple systems. So our students are systems. Oh, that slide didn't get all the way in. I'll have to tell you about it. Our students are systems. They're individual psyches. They're inside of a system, which is the cohort psyche, inside of a system, which is the program psyche, which includes the psyche of the faculty, and they're inside of a system, which is the institution psyche, and then there's another nesting doll, which is the psyche of the nation and the psyche of the state, the educational psyche, I would say, of the nation and the state. And so what we do is we tend to the nest. As an educator, I must remain aware of this reciprocity of relationship, which requires agility, Suraj, thank you for that word, requires agility in order to tend to all the parts of the system for the good of the whole. As a depth psychologist, I must remain aware that the nation, the state, the institution, the program, and its faculty and the cohort are all nested within the student. But also, as a citizen, I must remain aware that the student, the cohort, the program and its faculty, the institution, and the state are all nested within the nation. Yes? Are all nested within the nation. And more importantly, of course, all nested inside of this beautiful blue globe we all live on and this marvelously enchanted universe we all live in. So in the end, this is my answer to my burning question: what is an education for individuation? I would answer by saying it's the search for and the recognition of our larger selves that walk this glorious sky. Thank you.